So once upon a time, I had this friend who lived in the commune with me, and she used to make biodiesel. And I thought that was pretty cool. But she did not think that was pretty cool. She did not have time for biodiesel. So she left about 16 20-liter cans of used fryer oil in a shed. Well, about 6 years later, I was cleaning out this shed and I discovered her fryer oil collection, and I thought to myself, now what am I gonna do with this? I don't have time to make biodiesel. So I looked in the internet and I typed in, can you put fryer oil into the compost pile? And it said, do not put fryer oil into the compost pile because it attracts earthworms. So me, loving earthworms, I was like, oh, I want to attract some earthworms. Let me just pour the fryer oil in my compost pile. Now I have one of the world's best compost piles. I had 2,000 chickens, and I had a whole bunch of high school, middle school students who used to go out with me, and we would clean out all this chicken manure several times a year, and we would put it in this big yard, and then I would take the tractor and I would push this manure into huge piles for it to decompose. So I dragged all this oil down to the piles, and that day was a unfortunate day. Wildcat had killed numerous chickens that day, so I dug a hole in the top of the manure pile to bury the chickens, and then I covered up the chickens with some manure, and then I poured the oil on top of the manure pile. I want to show a little bit about the chemical structure of oil while I'm here. So we have 3 branches, basically. If you know about chemistry, you know that oil usually has 3 branches. It doesn't have a phosphorus like a lot of oils do at the tip, but it does have these carboxyl groups here. You might be like, oh, carboxyl, what's that? Basically, the thing about carboxyl is there's a hydrogen on these carboxyls that gets popped off at some point, and then it becomes carboxylic acid, and then basically that just hangs out in the soil and it like grabs onto nutrients, and that's why that's important. So at the end of oil, there's these functional groups, I guess, and I just marked them like this because I didn't want to make the whole thing, but they're about 10 to 18 carbons long, and the ones on soybean is called oleic acid and laurelic acid. So those are also super long. So we have a ton of carbon and a little bit of oxygen, and then no nitrogen, as you can see. Now something about chicken manure and chicken dead bodies for that matter is they have a lot of nitrogen in them. So I don't know if you've ever cleaned out a chicken coop, but if you ever cleaned out a chicken coop, sometimes you're scooping away and you just get this horrible feeling in your head and in here. It's like a smell, but it's also like a gas, and you can't breathe, and you're just, oh, this is horrible, what's happening? That is ammonia that is in the chicken feed, or in the chicken manure. So ammonia is just 1 nitrogen and 3 little hydrogens like this. And that happens when there's too much nitrogen in the chicken manure that the carbon in the chicken manure can't balance it out. So chicken manure usually, for perfect compost, you want to have 30 carbon atoms for every 1 nitrogen atom, and then they balance each other, and then the ammonia doesn't go flying off into the air. But in chicken manure, there's around 8 carbon atoms for every 1 nitrogen atom. So this nitrogen loves to fly off into the air. Now, when we were raising these chickens, my husband was using lactic acid bacteria, and he was spraying it on the floor of the chicken coop, and he also put a lot of rice husks and also wood chips from the forest, and also forest soil on the floor of the chicken coop to control that. But anyway, there was some nitrogen loss, and you can always smell when you go past maybe cattle barns with a lot of cattle in them, that nitrogen smell as well. So my goal is to not be losing nitrogen. So I thought also, all right, I'm going to put this oil into my chicken manure, and hopefully it'll decompose, it'll attract some worms, it'll grab onto some nitrogen so that it's not lost into the air. And then also, I read in some research that if you have crop residues with more oil in them, the fungus that's in the soil is more likely to be chewing down on those oils, and it's more likely to break those down along with the other dead plant residue and make glomalin, which is sort of a soil protein, and protein of course has a lot of nitrogen in it. I made a amino acid here. Amino acids, about between 18 and 300 of them will hook up in a line and they'll become a protein, and every one of them has at least one nitrogen in it. So proteins are very high in nitrogen, but glomalin in the soil as a protein, it doesn't break down very easily, and it stays there for a long time, and it also holds on to a lot of nutrients. So I had like this double pronged, like what if I add the oil, and that can kind of cause some more. All right, we'll try again. I ran out of battery. So I had this idea of, if I add this oil, maybe I can attract some worms and I can get this fungus to grow in the chicken manure, because I know chicken manure is usually have a lot more bacteria in it, and bacterial decomposition is great for releasing nutrients, but it's not as great for holding on to soil fertility for a long period of time. So I had all these sort of, I'm going to have this strategic plan, and you know what? It worked. So of all the harebrained ideas I've had in my life, I was shocked to find out that pouring hundreds of liters of used fryer oil into the manure pile actually worked. I dug into there in the spring, and there were vast areas that were just full of fungal mycelial growth, and there were millions and millions of worms. It was like red spaghetti worms of everything. And so I dug into that with the tractor, and I filled up my pickup, and I brought it to the potato field, and I don't know how to grow no-till potatoes, so I tilled that manure into the ground and probably sliced those earthworms into tiny bits, ending their lives. But who knows, maybe they survived. And the other part of that manure pile I brought to the rice field and spread it on the rice field. And if you know anything about growing rice fields get flooded in the spring, so those worms, millions of them, probably also were sacrificed to my garden. But we did get really great rice harvest and potato harvest that year. And I learned something about how to build fertility using oil. Hopefully that'll be successful, and that's something that you guys can use in your own gardens, is putting fryer oil, if you have extra, into your compost pile, and see if you get as good of results as I did. I hope you do.